you know, I have a bunch of questions from the people sent in. Claudio, even at one of the conferences, said hello to a 6 talked to him, and he said, and you know you're 6, correct? And he said, no, I'm a 9. I want peace. And let me tell you why. And he started explaining it. And Claudio just had such a sad look on his face. And he said, Katherine, someone has got to help these 6s. And I didn't really think that at that time, because that was like in 2004. But I had already made my card test then, and I was already beginning to see the patterns in a new way that all the wonderful 6s have shared with me over the years. And having a 6 child and best friend that's a 6 and 6 friends, I find you guys adorable. So I wanted everyone to have that opportunity. But now that I'm saying this right now about Claudio, I forgot he said that. I completely forgot. But I know the person he was talking to. I remember the conversation, and there's it is sad when people haven't gotten their type yet. And I understand what Claudio was talking about, because he wanted everybody to have the opportunity to know what they were really, how they were hiding a piece of truth from themselves. And that it wasn't deliberate, it wasn't meant to be anything other than a way to be safe. And that once we knew that, we had the chance to do the deeper work. And he liked the notion of my work with Tritype, but he hadn't really organized it that way. But he did feel like if there was a hierarchy, like he did like the notion of stacking the instincts, because we did talk about that. And he was considering that maybe the centers could be stacked like the instincts. Because what many people don't know is that when he created the idea of the instincts, it was that he noticed people having similar qualities that were more focused on the domain of physical survival and the domain of social relating and the domain of the one-to-one relationship. And that what he had learned from Ichazo were these triads, instinctual triads, and that he considered that there was another division beyond just the type, the center, and the type, because he saw these variations within type. So he took Ichazo's 3 centers, instinctual centers, which were conservation, relations, and originally syntony, but changed to adaptation. And he made them in a primitive form and said, okay, with his psychological knowledge and all of his diverse knowledge, he thought, well, if I take those same 3 instincts and put them at the level of primal survival, those would be subtypes of the Enneagram types. And when people know that and they write about the type and the instinct together, which is called subtype, it's a subdivision of the type, then it rings true for people. If they read it or hear it, they resonate. But if someone's trying to rewrite what an individual has already written about the instincts, if they don't know that it's based on that particular formula of a division within a division, and it was based on the original triads, then it won't ring true to people. And they'll say, well, I'm this, but I'm not that. So if everyone just knew that Claudio did not move away from the concept from Ichazo, he just was respectful and didn't use Ichazo, those terms that were since trademarked, and was teaching privately. And there was always a respect for what he learned from Ichazo, but he also took it a step further in terms of the instincts as these subtypes. And actually, when I first met him in 96, and he looked at my research, he said that he had thought that he needed to learn a lot more because he didn't really work with people's instincts. He had just begun exploring it again right before he met me. And that he felt like he hadn't really seen them all as accurately. And he added more. And I was very lucky that I happened to have the chance to be with him when I did my research. And he did his first training in 23 and a half years. And we were able to connect on that level. And he really found that he also had seen where people had like a mini passion. And it was that their instinct was so strong that he couldn't quite tell their type. And that he used a sand sifter. And he just put people in this sand sifter and they go into their correct type. But there would always be a few pieces of sand that were too big that wouldn't just drop in. And that he was exploring that idea of why. And he retyped Hitler. He originally had him as a 6 and he changed him to a sexual 4. And he had Patton as a sexual 4 and he retyped him as an 8. He continued to learn, and he said that after talking to other people that had expertise he did not have, he would modify his understanding. And he did that. And I really respect him for that because he continued to do that. And the one question that I was asked is about integration, disintegration, because it's confusing what was transmitted through the years. And Claudio told me in the 96 training, because actually I was the one who asked the question, wait a minute, I've done all this research and people seem to use their lines of connection positively, both lines, and both lines negatively. And the first thing he said, the first statement he made was that he just looks at pathology and what's in the way of your inner knowing and letting go of the ego, the tyranny of the ego. But that he was misquoted, that in one study group, he thought of the ideas of using the arrows, which is, for those of you who don't know, the triangle is mapping the law of 3, and the hexad, the 142857, is mapping the law of 7. And of course, the circle is the law of 0 or 1. And it creates the dynamic aspect of both creation and movement within the universe. So he was looking at maybe it's harder to go one direction and easier to go another. And he played with that idea. And then he remembered Ichazo's trialectics, which is everything's in the law of 3, and that you couldn't just go one direction or the other. It wouldn't fit the movement within the Enneagram of being patterns of 3 everywhere. So he dropped it. And then it was picked up in particular by Father Robert Oakes in that class. And he liked the idea of using those movements along the lines of connection, one way or the other, as to how to work on yourself. And then it was transmitted. And the irony is that a lot of people that were even in his groups where he said, no, I decided not to use that, was like spaghetti threw against the wall, and what sticks he knows is true, what didn't stick isn't true. And they read the books of people who had studied under Oakes, and they added it to their work as well, which was fascinating to him. That an error could be, even people who knew he didn't use it then put it into their books. But he he was not the type. He was a very humble guy. And actually, I say guy, but man. And he would not like try to force it. It'd be if someone wanted to know, they could ask him. So I just happened to ask, but he did put it in his book, Enneatypes in psychotherapy. He did document it there, and it is on videos that you might still be able to get on YouTube, but you can purchase. So he did begin to see that it was tragic that people were mistyping based on this understanding, because he felt like he'd been clear all along that no, those are your lines of connection. One isn't good and one isn't bad. You're always having the dynamic of your type with your two lines of connection and your type with your two wings. The wings are omnipresent. I didn't mean to go into that, but it was one of the questions that a lot of people have been asking me lately. So I thought I'd just explain that it was really an accident that then was disseminated, because no one said, hey, wait a minute. And I didn't even say, wait a minute. I just told people who studied with me that, oh no, you both use both wings, both lines of connection. And when you're in a negative space, you're using all of it at once, and you're using your dominant type in each center. But I didn't make a public outcry that, no, this is wrong. But I just feel like it would be really helpful for people to know the truth, that it was a misquote of what he said. And he never meant for it to be a formula for typing someone or not seeing the high side of their line of connection. Like he said, well, Katherine, if you're the 8, you have 2 and 5, and I'm sure you can see times when you're coming from a place of compassion and empathy where you're using 5 and 2. And he said, I'm sure there are times when you are not coming from your a version of higher self, and that you see the 8, 2, and 5 just constantly moving. And that was true. He actually wanted me to look at, I didn't go through a sand sifter, and at that time he had not recognized the archetype of the priest, and that's a whole other thing. That's the visual way we look. And he wanted to know whether I was an 8, a 7, or a 4. And he said, would I consider for a month looking at myself as an 8, I'd already done, as a 4, and then as a 7. And I did it. I actually spent a month saying, oh, I did that for these reasons, considering I was a 7. And I did it for a month with a 4. And this was at the same time I was developing Tritype, but I didn't call it Tritype. I called it 3 types. But I didn't like formalize it. But I knew, like the instincts, there was a stacking. And I thought, I think Naranjo is seeing what I've seen in others, and he's seeing in me. And it was the best thing I could have ever done, because I let in my 4. I didn't want to be a 4 in the Tritype. And doing that, I could find the things that were 4, which when we do that, is just as liberating, finding the other types in our Tritype. And then I next time I saw Claudio, I told him my experience. He asked me and how I decided and what. And then he said, oh, now I see an 8 I had not seen before. And everything leads to a greater awareness, but it's based on the defense strategy. We have to always go back to this defense strategy. Yes, there are archetypes, visual archetypes, that were kind of identified in the early Enneagram. But remember, it's only 50 years old, so a lot more unfolded. And where I found it was in the micro expressions more than anything, and the talk style and language, like where our attention actually goes. Not like I've worked with identical twins that I mean, if they held still and didn't move, they looked identical. But then once there was an issue, they were two different tritypes and two different instincts, and their parents could not figure it out, why they had to parent the children differently. So that's why they came to me, because they wanted to learn how to have them be the same. And I said, actually, they're two different tritypes, and they're two different instinctual types. They're going to be different, and this is how. So I encourage everybody to continue to consider what you don't know about yourself. And the other thing that both Ichazo and Naranjo said is that if we decide to go on the spiritual journey and we're doing it alone, it's extraordinary, because the alternative is to do nothing and hope for the best. But if you are going the way that will open your consciousness and see what you don't see and put you more directly in union with your true self, then work hard. But he said, if you really want to know more, do it with someone else in tandem with a truthful other where you would be honest. And he said the best way to do the work is in a group, and a group that cares enough about you to not criticize you, but to help you see what you don't see. And I think a lot of us lack that if we have a caring friend that we trust, that's benevolent and giving us the feedback, we're more receptive. Or sometimes we have to be a little stronger about it if we really, really care. And then the other thing is, it's hard to have a group where everyone agrees to confidentiality and caring and compassion, and to stay in that space and be honest in a benevolent way. So I encourage everybody to try and find that, because it really, really has been extraordinary for me in my life to have all three scenarios. And we can live a happier, more fulfilling life if we're coming from compassion. So I just want to thank you all so very much. And Jerome, I met you a few years back. Do you remember that?
Where did we meet?
It was, I think it was in Berkeley at an event with Helen, maybe in the
2010.
Well,
I was on it. Could it have been 2010?
It could have, absolutely. I went everywhere. And of course, I've always did Helen and David's. I was there stand-in 8 because I live in Menlo Park. So I was always.
So one more thing was, since you've talked so much about Claudio, when I walked into that first class in 1974, he took one look at me and he said, well, he knew me. So he said, oh, here we have a doubter. And guess what? I doubted it.
Of course.
So it was pretty funny, to recognize that. It was pretty sweet too.
Yeah, yeah. Here we have a doubter. Yeah, he did do that actually. When I met him, there were only supposed to be like, I think 35 people, and then there were like 75 people. They had to finally cut it off. And it was chaotic because there were only 35 badges, or however many people we were supposed to be, with names. And then all the rest of the people didn't have names. And there weren't enough chairs, so some people had to sit on the floor. And it was like no one, the organizer nor Claudio, did anything to modify that. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, this is a real incubator here, because these people are used to being in trainings with Don and Rusty, or Helen and David, or Ted and Kathy, where everything's kind of taken care of. There's security and certainty, and like no one knew if they were going to get a badge or not get a badge. And I thought, wow, I'm seeing some of these people in a whole new light, because if we don't have our structure, our security, we show our defense strategy. And I said, when Claudia and I were discussing my research and stuff, I go, well, what about those people that were stressed out that they didn't have a badge? Why not just get little stick-on badges? He said, well, it's an experiment. If it's what happened, and how people manage that says a lot about their type. And it did. And I thought, oh, okay. Because I've never done a training like that. Everybody gets a name, everyone gets a tag. I don't want anybody not to have a tag. And I thought, I did learn a lot more about people, but we don't want to have to learn that way. So, yeah, it was fascinating. So I wish you the best with the Enneagram Prison Project, Jerome. I was in that for a while, and I taught actually in San Mateo 25 years ago in the with drug addicted felons. It was an extraordinary experience, very, very meaningful. So thank you all. Thank you, Yuan and Kai, for getting up in the middle of the night. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Aida, since you don't like technical anything and you're here. So I could count on my friend. I needed a sexual 6. All right. Thank you all. And then keep the feedback coming on the test. I love it. I take everything you say into consideration. And you'd be amazed that if you tell me something good or bad, I want the bad too. I listen to it, and then I compare and contrast it to other people that have said the same thing. So don't feel anything you'd say would be too petty or negative. I love it, because it doesn't mean I can change that particular thing you suggest, but I want to know what it is. And I'm trying very, very hard now to help the 6s that type as 6s and have all the markers feel comfortable exploring 6. So if there's anything you can recommend to me, I'm going to consider implementing it. All right. Thank you so much. And I will see you next month or whenever.
Thanks, Katherine.
Okay. Bye-bye.